where people will give their best at work if they feel aligned to the purpose and if they feel like they belong, sense of belonging. And so all we're chatting about empathy today is creating a sense of belonging. So that has to happen on work time. Welcome to PowrUp, a podcast full of insights for women that lead. Hosted by Nat and Kristen from Powrsuit, we're on a mission to amplify your impact as a leader. Join us each week and we'll share with you what's shaping our future, from AI to Gen Z. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 8 of PowrUp. PowrUp is a Powrsuit podcast and we exist to get more women in positions of power and influence. And why do we do that? It's because we need more of us there and we want to be there, even if what power and influence looks like is slightly different from what it's traditionally looked like. May not be senior leadership, it may not be that traditional success factors, it's whatever you want to do on your terms to succeed in your career. And on that front, we need diversity, right? Going forward, we are starting to deal with a brave new world that's full of brand new challenges. We need to have more diverse workplaces and more diverse leadership, which brings us really nicely to what we're talking about today, Kristen.
I was inspired because I went to this talk with Alan Bunting, and he is the coach of the Black Ferns, which won the World Cup last year, and New Zealand was in tears, and it was this incredible story. Rugby is really big, obviously, here, and we have talked about All Blacks for so many years, but this is a story of women and women overcoming all odds of not being paid as professional athletes, and their leadership style isn't unique to them in the world of sports. It's really interesting, but it's so relatable to business, and obviously they're like the ultimate high-performing team, and he just talked about his philosophy of a high empathy environment and a high expectation environment. And I was like, yes, because it's what we want to do, creating businesses and how we want to lead. And I just love that concept. So enormous subject, high performing teams. Why don't we talk about empathy today and the one side of the equation?
I love it because I think empathy for a very long time has been seen as a touchy-feely, nice to have, almost a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
When you are too busy being kind to actually ask for more and to get more out of people. And I think this has been a real challenge for me too, this idea of high performance and where empathy fits in, because I think traditionally it has been sold as a real softly thing that leaders do that sort of undermines them.
Yeah, well, it could be when you said kind, I think that is that sympathy or is that not empathy? Because I remember when my kids were going through school, that's when I learned the difference. And empathy, you want your kids to be empathetic and you're always wondering for a few years, are they, aren't they? I don't know.
No, all kids are psychopaths.
Okay, so I'm thinking mine are, of course. And so I learned through the school system the difference between sympathy and empathy. And when kids feel sorry for other kids, you go, oh, well, that's empathetic. But it's actually not. Empathy is understanding that others have emotions and respecting them, but also seeing their perspective. Because we are all in this one chessboard. We're in chessboard game at school and at work. And if you can understand others' perspectives, we can kind of get through this game better and unscathed. And so I kind of learned that difference with them going through school.
I love it. And I was having a great conversation on Saturday night around this topic accidentally with crying and how much we cry watching some stupid TV ads. And it was a great conversation. There was actually a gender mix there and everyone cried at very similar things. It was the ads where there's a three-legged dog and and there's a person.
For me, it's Nike ads.
Oh,
just
Nike
when, women
ads.
or anyone overcomes Nike
that
ads.
Nike ad. I was going to repost it the other day. Apparently it's an old one, but about how women, the incredible ad, but how that to me is, sympathy is the ability to feel sorry for someone when something bad happens to them or when they've experienced something. But empathy is that feeling of like, I'm sort of in it with you, which means when you see a three-legged dog being adopted by someone, you feel that emotion of hope.
Yeah, but on that, it's a win-win, isn't it? Empathy, the three-legged dog example, that is a win-win relationship. That is a transaction of each other kind of making the whole better.
Absolutely. And I would suggest that sympathy is actually unhelpful a lot of the time, because we've all been there. You know, when you've done something and you're feeling miserable, you've gone through a breakup, whatever it is, and people are like, oh, and you're like, oh no, that's not what I need. I need someone who's like, I get where you're at, and I'm going to help you get where you need to go. And sympathy can be quite sort of talking down, and empathy can be sitting alongside, which I think is so. In a workplace, I think it's a relatively new, I mean, it's talked about a lot at the moment, but it's a relatively new leadership conversation. So we thought today we're sort of going to throw out the script today and just chat a bit about our experiences with empathy in the workplace, how we think it fits, what are the pros and cons, and where does empathy start and stop, because that's a really important conversation too, because I think we've all been there where you sort of end up going, oh, we do actually have to perform somewhere along the line, which is obviously another part of this equation. So I don't know, do we want to kick off with
I think we should kick off with its reemergence, because why we're even having this conversation, Nat, is because of COVID. And this is such an interesting thing, that empathy has been around, obviously. We've had waves of human race of, coming together through crises, and you come out stronger. And I think we saw that
World War II.
Well, 9/11 even.
9/11,
like the whole world, you know, so we see human empathy and how can we work together to come out stronger, and lots of things change as a result of it. But so interesting, in September 2020, the word empathy was one of the top Google searches in 1 week, in that the absolute top Google search.
Everyone's like, what is it?
Yeah. It carried all the way through November, to the fact that it turned into one of the top business searches. So this concept of humans having empathy in the midst of this insane pandemic, and how do we care for one another and work through and get to the other side, but also businesses, how can we be empathetic by extracting people's best work still, because we still got to go do stuff as businesses. We can't fall over, but how do we care for the people in a new way because of this, in amidst this pandemic?
Do you think, I actually reckon, and this is probably structural issues, but we have been taught to believe over our whole lives that humans are innately non-empathetic. And I mean that because things I didn't know that. Well, Lord of the Flies, for example, the assumption that when things go wrong, we will turn to worse selves. Yes, so there's Lord of the Flies, there's the concept of zombies, all these things, survivalists, this idea that when things go really badly wrong, humans will look after themselves and turn against each other. That is like in pop culture, right? But then every time, I mean, I watched this great documentary about, was it a plane crash in the Andes? A real life Lord of the Flies.
Alive.
And what actually happened,
except for when they ate each other.
Well, no, they didn't. See, that's a myth.
No, they did.
They ate the dead people.
Well,
they ate the people who died to survive. Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but they did what they needed to do. But I think
that's a great story.
But they undermine that message that we're individualists, because actually what happens in moments of crisis is humans band together. And I think what happened with COVID is that for the first time ever, there was actual proof, widespread proof, that banding together led to better results than being more individualistic.
Yes, but we're looking back and seeing that now. So they're showing the countries and organizations that were more empathetic during that time outperformed those that didn't. And let's talk about role modeling and Jacinda. But companies that led with empathy to achieve the mission got off pretty well. In fact, New Zealand's COVID death rates were the lowest for the first 2 years of the pandemic.
And I remember watching that right at the start, the difference between prime ministers, presidents who were ordering their people and taking a real stick approach, and those very small number who were largely women actually who took a carrot approach. And I think this is a really defining moment.
Well,
and
it's women, and it was actually, what did they classify them as? Liberal government. So it was actually slightly left of center governments that tended to come out less scathed than those that were right, you know, I don't know, conservative or whatever. Yeah.
And I think for me, the real light bulb moment there, which is something that I've had to really grapple with, is empathy. True empathy, when it comes to performance, is the belief that people by default will do the best by you, each other, your organization, if you create the ultimate conditions for them to do it. If you, like that servant leadership thing, if you
Yeah.
really look after people, they will perform better. And that's scary because it's not tangible. I think traditional styles of leadership have been more, you can monitor their work, you can see them sitting at desks, you expect people to sort of behave somewhat like robots and perform equally all the time. But that sort of is a giant leap of faith to just go, I believe that people by default will be at their best if we treat them at their best.
Do you think that there is a generational shift? And I know that COVID just accelerated this thing with empathetic leadership. And we had, well, here in New Zealand, we did have an empathetic role model that was really helpful. And we all got behind that. You know, she definitely, her and, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the doctor. He's like so famous.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield.
Bloomfield.
You don't obviously have his face on a tea
No,
towel
I
like
don't.
half of New Zealand.
I'm so embarrassed. But loved him. He's moved on. But I think they role modeled empathy and won our hearts and minds, which was great. There was still a really clear mission. There was decisive action. There was, you know, they didn't let the ship fall over. They were like, these are the hard things we need to do. But if we keep open lines of communication and if we win your hearts and minds, that we can come out this better, stronger, you know, then that's fantastic. But what I was getting at was, do you think the shift, because autocratic leadership style worked like really well since the 1800s in an environment where there's people just coming into work, you're clocking in, you're clocking out, you're an assembly line worker. We kind of don't need to know your whole person.
You don't need to be motivated.
No, we don't need to know your authentic
You're making
self.
widgets.
And even through this rise of corporate industry and, you know, I don't know, .com boom and everything, these businesses did just fine, thanks very much. So what's changed? And I want to chat about Gen Z. What's changed, do you think? Because I'm not convinced this leadership style would have worked 100 years ago.
No.
Yeah.
But then isn't that kind of how the world works? That 100 years ago, we lived in an extremely different world where, I mean, 100 years ago, people were living on farms and looking after themselves. I mean, the world's changed so quickly.
Yeah.
But moving into factories, you very much are. Factories and jobs where it's very much... Even I spoke to someone the other day who was around when people were still writing notes by hand and typists were typing them up. Like, such a different style of output. Whereas now we need knowledge, we need creativity and innovation. Like, the robots are going to do the rest now.
Yeah,
so
no,
we need people to perform very different functions.
And could there be something that we are so, like it or not, thanks to the iPhone and thanks to tech, we are so... I hate to say we are our work, but there's this thing, we've come out of COVID again with this sense of like real purpose, and people want to be aligned to purpose-driven companies. Consumers want to put their money in companies that are doing good. There is this shift into do no harm. That's where I want to spend my money. That's where I want to work. If you're a leader, you have to be able to communicate that purpose, because we're more connected to our work, or we have choice? We have more choice than ever?
We may have had more choice than ever, but we've also come out of 13 years of economic growth where I think people just expect more and more.
True.
And so I think that's the other side of empathy, which I'd like to discuss, is that it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And I think in recent years, businesses have been bending over backwards because there is a talent shortage.
Yes, more on talent.
And they are delivering more and more of what people want, and the demands of what people want, quite rightly, increase. That's the marketplace. But now we're moving into a time of economic uncertainty. That balance is shifting. And I think when I am thinking back to my experience of empathy at work, because I think we're all innately empathetic, what was the ingredients that made it actually productive versus ending up feeling like you are giving and not getting.
Yeah.
And I think it might be worth discussing that two-way street.
Yeah.
Like, what have you seen when you're dealing with empathy in the workplace?
Yeah, what have I seen?
Just to give you a moment to think while
Yeah.
I just threw that question at you. I think there's two parts to empathy. One is we innately are empathetic, but it's like basic empathy. We are social creatures biologically. We like to identify with other people around us. So the basic way of having the empathy in our lives is to be surrounded by people who look, act, think like us. So that's been the experience in the past, and probably why a lot of the organizational structures as they are exist, because
But
you
wouldn't you
hire
say
people
that's
who
the
look like you.
opposite of empathy is... I mean, I guess, is it a safe form of empathy? And there's probably
it's beginner level empathy,
beginner
right?
level empathy, because the real definition of empathy, going back to understanding others' emotions, but the power for an organization is understanding others' perspectives.
Absolutely.
And they're, if everyone's the same, and you hear about this on board of directors, that you're there to have robust discussions. You are minimizing risk, and you should be disagreeing. Like that board of directors and executive leadership teams is where all that wrestling should happen for the best of the business and the shareholders.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know if
humans...
I'd call it empathy that they love groupthink.
Well, I don't think people think of it like that, because
Yeah.
humans are always, we use stereotypes and defaults and biases to make our lives simpler, right? So you would think you're empathetic because you're in a group of people and you really do empathize with their experience because you've lived it. It's
Okay.
But what we
All
need
right.
to do now, if you want to create
Get
diverse organization,
uncomfortable.
is actually really uncomfortable empathy. I think it really is, because I think when you think about the examples, even recently, COVID being a great one, I was very quick to jump to not being a fan of anti-vaxxers. Very quickly, lumped them all in one group. They were not like me. I was part of the team of 5 million trying to save this country and people's lives. They didn't care. It took me a while to actually stop, get off my high horse and empathize with other people and recognize that that group was actually 5,000 different groups. People who'd been let down by the health system, people who quite rightly were questioning, why should I do this thing? It's raced through. I want to know more about it. All the way through
And it is an uncomfortable place, because there's give and take, and there's hard conversations that need to be had, and there's sometimes compromise. So you have to compromise on, and at that point you've possibly felt it was your safety, and so that is when that human instinct kicks in, and you need to lead with empathy, and to have empathy and to demonstrate it as a human being. It is actually overcoming those protective fight or flight instincts and kind of reaching across. And like Nelson Mandela, I chatted a little bit about him in the newsletter this week. His book, oh my gosh, was so profound. I read it years ago. A Long Walk Home, I think it was, because it was like a 27-year walk home that took him. He was jailed for 27 years. And he's the ultimate example of putting aside, I mean, he could have been a ruined man and bitter man for being jailed wrongly, for having different views and trying to overcome this huge racial and political divide in this country. But he came out, forgave his captors, and led that nation into exceptional times.
I think it's very easy to convince ourselves, which is why I think we all are innately empathetic, is it's very easy to cut off the hard parts and just go, I really empathize with this group. In America, the gun debate, people empathize with the people who want to keep guns, and people empathize with the people who want to save children, and everyone's talking about empathy, but no one's actually taking that hard step to go, what is it that makes you feel this so strongly, and how might we meet in the middle of it? I mean, I know some people are, but those are the conversations. That's hard empathy, and that's what you need in diverse organizations.
That is the win-win, isn't it? And that is the reason that works in a high-performing team, is because you have a unique perspective. I guess what's highlighted is the success of the business. We're all here to fulfill this purpose and this mission of this organization. We have this strategy. You have a perspective on that. I have a perspective on that. I guess the win-win is to have enough interesting perspectives about that and your lived experiences, and we can move the boat faster. We can get there in a much better way, better outcomes for our customers, for our business.
Yeah, because I think that idea of you can sledgehammer your beliefs into other people, which is actually the default for most of us. Most of us go through life wanting to tell other people that we're right, really. And I think maybe that's the first thing I've really been grappling with empathy since we decided to talk about it, is how do you live a truly empathetic life? And that is actually leaving your beliefs at the door, or what you said before, strong opinions loosely held, of being able to go in with an open mindset of curiosity and learning to almost have your opinion changed, rather than going in with the mindset of changing someone else's opinion. And that's probably a fundamental tenet to empathy that I think we could probably all do a little bit more of, because I think we talk a lot about empathetic leadership, but how many of us are living true to that? Because it's one thing to say, I give people time off when they need it, I have a diverse culture, I do this stuff, but are we truly living that really hard, challenging
Well, we've
tensioned
been
empathy.
Yeah, we've been, as leaders, when you're rising up as a leader in an organization or through your career, you have relied on these behaviors that have worked up until now. And so you have been taught about judgment and your instinct and validating those instincts. And you make decisions and you make decisive decisions. And that's kind of got you to where you are today. But it might not get you to building a high-performing team or an exceptional world-class organization, because what got you here isn't going to get you there. And in order to get that next step up, it is actually about dropping that stuff and almost going to that, you mentioned servant leadership up front, is that I can't do this on my own. I don't know everything, but I need this incredibly rich, diverse team around me. I have to trust they understand the vision, where we're going, what success looks like, and we'll talk about expectations next week. But it's that sense of I'm enabling them to feel a part of something and do their best work. And I'm putting all the stuff that I learned I got to being a leader aside.
And I think, like my friend Rachel would call that, basking in the reflected glory of your people.
Yeah.
Is that your job is to help them succeed so you can bask in that beautiful aura of their success.
Yeah.
And the other label I heard the other day that I really love is a student of leadership. And I think empathy is really closely aligned with student. If you approach leadership as a student rather than as an expert, you have a very empathetic approach. You're constantly making mistakes, because we all do, and learning from them, which I think is also that empathy part of to go, I'm back to myself. You have to make decisions. We can't, because one thing women sometimes do is we end up in inertia trying to please everyone, and that's not empathy. That is lack of confidence. But once you've made a decision, you're going to learn some stuff from it. And being a student of leadership and an empathetic leader leads you to go, oh, what did I do wrong? What missteps did I make? What can I improve next time? And start to make a difference
and
that
to
way.
Communicate those as well, I think. And that takes vulnerability, which is going to be definitely another Power Up episode. I am pretty good, and I do think this is my empathetic leadership style, is removing barriers. I go straight to tactical, like what does that look like in an everyday thing? My job is to remove everyone's barriers. What's blocking you today, or what's stopping us from doing the thing? And then I feel in control of doing something. And that's maybe how I practice it. What have been your experiences?
Well, I actually think one-on-ones was a really interesting thing to talk about and think about this week, because one of the things that feels really strongly correlated with empathy is absolute personalization. And that's again really challenging to go, the three people you might be leading in your team have three completely different sets of needs. And to be able to really, I mean, this is what I mean, empathy is extremely hard, because you now have to tailor your behavior to three completely different humans. I encourage everyone to read the one-on-one article, because it actually, I think a lot of us don't do them very well. We try, as a general rule, we're busy. We try and template things, and templates are the antidote to empathy, because you try and apply a one-size-fits-all. And we've had big discussions in the past with people leaders about measuring performance and how do you KPIs and all that sort of stuff, which I think a lot of really amazing people leaders I look up to are starting to sort of push back on and say what actually empathetic leadership looks like is, what do you want to achieve, which we'll go over next week, and how do I equip this person to get there? And it doesn't necessarily mean setting targets, and it doesn't necessarily mean looking at workflow and work in progress and all that sort of stuff. It's about what is the thing you need from me. And I've been reflecting on some of my terribly run one-on-ones. I've done a whole bunch of stuff badly in my life. Some of them I've cancelled them. Big no-no, don't do that. I turned up late to them. Big no-no, don't do that. But some of the best ones I've had is after you've built trust, and I think that's a huge part of empathy, two-way street. You build trust through 1,000 tiny actions. You have these one-on-ones. They start out being quite awkward. You sort of formal, you're asking questions. You may or may not get feedback every week on even just behavior for what people's body language is. But there've been some where we haven't even talked about anything other than someone will raise, this one thing that happened with their child. And you spend half an hour talking about their child and something that happened to them that week. And your relationship from there becomes it's almost like a leapfrog ahead where suddenly you know each other as humans, you've been vulnerable together, you've moved out of that work stage, and you've proven you've got each other's back.
Well, in a way, that's the same thing as removing barriers. We all have baggage, right? And we come in with all sorts of, life is really complex. And that concept that I was trying to articulate earlier, which is really tough. We are our work. We are so defined, and we want purpose-led lives and purpose-led work. But the removing the barriers, that's exactly what you've done in that situation, is you've shared the weight of something that's been stopping them from doing their best work. And it might not be an external blocker, but it could be internal. It could be their confidence, or it could be that they've had to mask and hide who they are, which is this whole concept of removing the barriers, but also enabling everyone to be authentic themselves and bring themselves to work. And that was a really big thing last year, eh? Like, what, that was kind of scary for us when we first heard it as leaders running a business. What does that even mean? Like, does that mean we're going to be chatting dating disasters at work? Because, like, yes, I love that.
We were, like, a lot of my friends have a clear work-life distinction, and they do not talk about their personal life at work to anyone.
So,
but I would put that down to leadership again, because I would say, yes, on day one, absolutely don't. But how do you create an environment where someone feels safe to do that? Maybe in 6 months, 12 months. And I mean, I only know how I do it. And I suppose you only know how you do it, which is to be vulnerable, to be myself, to share stories of my life. Because that's the other thing. I think as a leader, it's very easy to be pigeonholed into the person who's the boss, who's there telling you what to do, and not as a person yourself, which is that two-way street thing.
And I think personal stories are great because that means someone feels safe. But I wonder if it's about that it should be a safe work environment that respects everyone's backgrounds and practices. But there's something with enabling your personality quirks. Like, your magic is what is going to, help drive better ideas. And if you have this, and I know in my early career, there was very much, and probably because it was that time as well, there was this sense of you put your work face on and you are professional, and I'd have to lower my voice. And if I was the only female in the room, I had to act like them.
I'd actually prefer if you kept that voice lower. Do that again. Do sexy. The rest of the podcast with your low, sexy voice.
I shall. That's probably really annoying, but these are behaviors that I felt I had to mold into them, right? So that I wasn't safe. I probably wasn't bringing my best work to work because I just changed.
You were acting the whole time. You had to put all that mental effort into presenting yourself. There's a sense of
you bring your quirks of your personality because that's your creativity and your ideas, and I think that's okay.
No, I agree, and I think maybe we should jump into a few tips now of what you can do to actually, we've talked a little bit about removing barriers, creating a safe space. That creating a safe space, yes, you can have one-on-ones and you can talk to people, but there's a few things that I think we have done very well in the past. I mean, I'm not saying we've done everything right because it took a while. When we first started, we were all quite similar. I mean, we had two men, 2 women on the founding team, but we all like to just go to a bar and chat. We were all relatively big talkers. Actually, one of us wasn't. He drank tea and didn't talk as much, but he was happy to go along. We had a really great, I suppose, routine of going and debriefing. When more people joined, and we deliberately hired, we had basically 50% of people who had been born outside of New Zealand from all over the world. We had 50-50 gender split. We had all these incredible, wacky people. And they all were unique. And one of the simplest things that we did was to change how we socialized, which I think you led. So you want to go into...
Well, there are a few things. One is recognizing that a parent might need to go pick up child after work, or they don't feel comfortable in a bar situation. Could be religious beliefs, could be whatever. And so we actually turned our social and connection time. I don't know if you're thinking of this experience or example.
I mean, Kristen made us go surfing.
Oh yeah, we did different things, like went surfing. I made you do that, yes. But we also did shared lunches, so everyone could bring, and that was so interesting because it was like, bring something that symbolizes your childhood or it could be ethnicity, whatever. And I mean, my goodness. Oh, and then when we introduced everyone, we were like, name the city you were born in.
Oh, that was crazy.
Every single person, some are different, incredible. So I love this concept of it's not that, it doesn't have to be the golf course with the boys anymore, and just because you're picking up the kids kids or you're this, you get cut out of all that stuff. Like,
Yes.
it is upon the organizations to support people to connect on that political front. I hate to use the word political, it's not, but that's what my experience was with women that needed to leave. They couldn't partake in the drinking and the golf.
Connection level, the human to human connection.
They couldn't be seen.
Yeah.
And so everyone needs to be seen. They need to be heard. They need to be able to feel safe to be quirky. And we just did that in the daytime, sharing over food.
Yeah, and I actually think you put in place a bunch of stuff. We also encouraged other people to do what they wanted to do. So we had sourdough society. Remember sourdough? Because there was a bunch of people who shared those disgusting sourdough starters. But there was sourdough. They got heavily into different types of butter. I mean, it got crazy. We did dog squad. We did butt stuff. Remember, we did personal training for a while with one of the guys at work. His brother took us for personal training sessions.
Yeah.
We did still go to bars sometimes. We went surfing. But a lot of that stuff, it's location, it's the activity, it's the time.
Yeah.
Because I still know women now who would probably be perceived at work for being antisocial because they have children.
Yeah.
And so they can't just drop everything and go out to the bar at 5 p.m. when someone mentions it at 4:45. That is not empathy. Empathizing would be going, okay, we've got half of the audience is this, half of the audience is this. How are we going to make something? And maybe not everything fits everyone all the time, but how do we create enough stuff to be able to not just include people, but draw out those differences and celebrate them?
Yeah, and I think that's the social side of things, so people feel safe, because it's amazing how one half day or a couple hour thing away really breaks down those barriers, and so people can feel, I don't know if they feel safe, but they're like, this is actually, I get joy from this, which is really interesting, and I'm learning different people's perspectives. But there's also the working side of things, making sure that you have diverse perspectives around the meeting table. We made sure that we had different people when we were hiring people, so that their perspectives, our bias was cancelled, their perspectives were made known as well.
Well, and I think maybe that's the second action, is recognizing your bias. We are all biased, and we should actually put a link in the notes of this. Is there's a Harvard test, that implicit bias test, that's so worth people doing, because we're all biased, and if you think you're not, then you're kidding yourself. But recognizing we're all biased, you can actually start to put things in place. So you have multiple people doing job interviews. The other one that we did a lot of is cross-functional working. One of the things when it comes to empathy in a workplace is silos. When people are in the marketing team and they feel like they're up against the product team, who feels like they're up against the tech team, who feels like they're up against the op team, you don't have empathy. Whereas if you work together and understand each other's roles and see how hard different people work, you empathize with them a lot more. So putting in place those things to remove those biases, there's a lot of stuff you can do on that. And I think on those things, again, is it sort of counterintuitive? I don't know if it is, because a lot of people don't like to take time out of work for social club.
Well, I think it's like leadership development. Again, we've talked about, we are in a new world now where people will give their best at work if they feel aligned to the purpose and if they feel like they belong, sense of belonging. And so all we're chatting about empathy today is creating a sense of belonging. So that has to happen on work time.
I agree.
Because it equates to high performing, not just rowing the boat, but like seriously
sailing it on foils.
Foiling the boat. We are no longer rowing. Anyone can row a boat. Yeah. That is so old school. We are now in a knowledge economy where we've got to innovate.
Where we're trying to build these foils at the same time.
We're facing complex environments, really, and the only way we're going to win is diversity. We need foils on our boats. And so this stuff, just like leadership development, we know you're busy outside of work. You should be. We should be whole humans, but it has to happen on work time.
I think that's another way as leaders you can show empathy and encourage it in your workplace, is recognizing. I mean, there's so much research out there now that suggests people don't work 8 hours a day. It's very hard to focus that long. Take that into account. Actually budget time for people to be able to put tools down and socialize. They'll be more productive in the hours they're working.
Or I like this. Yes, socialize. I love socializing, but it could be like hackathon. It could be, hey everyone, we're going to throw a problem over to your team, and we want you to do breakouts into that stuff. Remember, the design team always held these fantastic design. What was it?
Lulu, incredible. They were called. What are they called? Design. I can't remember the label they put on them. We love to brand everything, but bring in different people from different parts of the office, at one point they were doing our Hatch merch, so it was just a whole design. They became the most highly anticipated ticket.
So it was work on work time. It
But
wasn't.
it was fun work. And
Yeah.
actually, if you looked at it on the surface, you may not think it was fun, but she'd built this incredible culture of everyone knew it was fun and everyone wanted to participate.
Yeah.
Non-designers, everyone. So there's that part. I think that part is a key.
Yeah.
I think the third thing is, from my side, is recognizing that we're not robots, and high performance teams are not high performance all the time.
Yeah.
And one thing that I learned is because I think my life has been pretty stripped of external factors, like I haven't had kids and I haven't always been in relationships and I've lived alone, so I could focus 24/7 on work for much longer than everyone else. And so it took me a while to realize that some days people have had a sick kid for a week, and the best thing you can do in that situation is give them some time off, and it will pay back tenfold if you're thinking productivity, but it's also just the right thing to do.
Well, and I think high performing teams can be high performing all the time, because you are pointing to one tiny piece of that high performing team. And so
team members can't be high performing all the time.
That's right. Like Black Ferns, for example, there are injuries, and you might, I remember in that World Cup final, one of them knew she'd done something wrong. She got a red card. She had to go. That was a critical, massive potential loss for New Zealand, to lose a key player for a critical part of the game. Like, that was like, oh my gosh, gold medal slipping through our fingers. What is the rest of the team?
The same thing would be Simone Biles bombing out of the Olympics. Bombing out.
That's
probably
tough,
sounds,
because that's individual sport.
No, but she was part of a team. And what she did was extremely empathetic, and she turned right around. I don't know, she showed such exceptional leadership and became the biggest cheerleader for that team. And
you're right, because of you're right, you're out. That was incredible to see that. But and that's what that team did. They rallied together, they knew each other's jobs, and they picked up the slack and filled the gap. And we've seen that, which is great. Yes, so I love that.
You're right, high performing team members, and expecting people to perform at their best all the time. You're actually better to go, I learned about exercise, 30% terrible, 30% mediocre, 30% exceptional. And I think that probably broadly tracks for life and work as well. And when you're on fire, throw everything at it. But when you're in that sort of really low patch, and I think we should talk at some point about period hacking and how we go through different cycles and how we should actually make work around that.
Cool.
But recognizing that those times you're not as productive. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, that's right. Do we want to leave everyone with an action? We didn't pre-dip. Which one do you want to do?
Well, I really wanted to go over change at work first, but we don't have to.
Well, what's a change at work?
Well, I'm just thinking that's another big area where you can show empathy, which is probably going to be quite relevant at the moment with restructures, redundancies. Even I heard years ago, changing desks can be one of the most stressful things that people go through. So empathy when you change at work, and I think we've both seen some examples recently of redundancies. They are a big thing in the tech community at the moment. Done well versus done poorly. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because otherwise we can just leave it as a bit of a...
No, I think there's a way to do redundancies right. I think some of those organizations, tech companies we see in the States, did them wrong. They basically tried to log into their systems. They were cut. That was it. There was zero communication. So I think high communication, really great package, offering career support to get... Like, these are human beings that have families to support probably, or themselves, and mortgages to pay. So it is very much about recognizing what is life going to be like in their shoes. They need to take care of their mental and physical selves. They need to take care of their financial selves, helping them, get forth, but also they're humans and they should be treated compassionately. So,
I agree.
Yeah,
and I think ruthless, cutthroat business people might disagree and say, well, they're out. But my suggestion would be, having spoken to quite a few people who've been impacted even 10 years ago during the GFC, just so you know, if you don't treat people with empathy when they're leaving, the people who stay behind will not be productive.
Well, ties back to the purpose of, what is it that you stand for, and how is that manifested in your workplace? Because that is your brand.
It is.
Your workplace is your brand.
And the people sitting in the office going, wow, you just shut them off Slack and cut them off email.
Thankfully, I've heard some great stories come out recently about how people are doing it well. It's very expensive.
There's some really cool stuff.
There's some great stories.
Yeah. So I just think that's worth thinking about when you're changing anything in a workplace.
Well, the desk
new jobs, promotions.
The desk thing is such a small thing. Why should they care? And we need to be agile. And not to say that you can't compromise and get there, but just by stopping that judgment, which leaders can do, and being curious about why that person feels they need their space. Like that could be something back to their childhood and having to be traipsed around moving a bunch of homes, and that's where they get their stability. And so it's actually just stopping and going,
why?
I need
Being
that person to be
curious.
agile, and we're going into cost cutting measures, and you're actually going, okay, I see where they're coming from. How can we work through this together?
And
what are the things that
I
can
agree.
support
a
you?
lot of leaders, though, we've aged out of youth.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to imagine when you're a leader and you're like, turn your desk, whatever. I go back to my calm house that I live alone in. There are a lot of 20-something-year-olds who can't see a future buying a house, who are living in a flat, who have to work from that flat, who move houses every couple of years.
Yes.
Maybe having a stable desk at work is one less pressure on their lives. It's really, again, empathizing with people who are in quite a different situation from you. I just wanted to touch on that.
And the very last thing I'm going to touch on while you're thinking about the action is the Gen Z, because I mentioned I'd say it, and it's just so interesting to watch this next generation come through. I'm raising 2 teens, and their schools have had to change how they do things because of mental health and anxiety, and Gen Z that really do care about more balance. My daughter says it all the time, I want balance, and I'm not going to be a slave to my work or a slave to this or a slave to that. I'm like, in my day,
we don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
that's
they're
empathy.
going to
We're gonna
teach
need
us.
it.
They're going to teach us. I've been learning. So I've learned about an enormous array of things for my child and the world and how it's changing. And it can be quite scary for someone who didn't grow up in that world. But as a leader, we have to, because this is the generation coming through that is going to need to feel balanced. They're going to need to feel heard and feel supported. So that was all about Gen Z. What's the action for today?
I don't know if you had one planned.
Nope.
But my one is, first step of building empathy is recognizing your bias. And someone told us a long time ago, next time you're at an event, go and talk to the person who looks least like you or you think you're least likely to get along with, because that is the best way to recognize your own bias and build empathy.
Nice.
If that feels a little bit scary, the second way I would do it is think about a belief you hold really strongly and hunt out someone that you know who has the opposite belief and go in really curiously just to understand why they have that belief. Don't try and convince them yours.
Yeah.
Don't try and sell your side. Just get comfortable having conversations with people who don't believe the same things as you believe and learn about them.
Love it. That's a great action.
Thank you, Kristen.
That was fun to chat empathy. We're going to chat high expectations next week, the other side of high performing teams, which will be great. Please visit Powrsuit.com. Go check out all of our free articles. Please subscribe to our podcast. Share the love. Share everything from Powrsuit.com to this PowrUp podcast. We love and give us feedback.
I was going to say
5 stars.
and 5-star rating, because you're on your app now. So now literally while we're saying this, just go and pop that 5-star, because it helps us a lot while we're getting started.
Yeah, we can reach and support more people. So we'd love that. So thanks everyone, and we will chat soon.
Bye.